The story begins in the quiet city of Burlington, where on November 24, 1946, a boy was born who would later become one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. His name was Ted Bundy. At first glance, nothing about his life seemed unusual. He appeared intelligent, polite, and even charming. Many people who met him described him as handsome and well-spoken. But behind that calm and friendly personality, something dark was slowly growing. Ted was raised by his grandparents during his early childhood. For many years, he believed that his mother was actually his sister. This confusing family situation would later be considered one of the psychological factors that may have affected his mind. As a child, Ted was quiet and intelligent. He did well in school and rarely caused trouble. Teachers saw him as a normal student, maybe a little shy, but nothing alarming. However, some neighbors later recalled strange behavior. One childhood friend once said that Ted enjoyed exploring dark places and sometimes showed disturbing curiosity about violence. But no one could imagine what he would eventually become. Years later, Ted moved with his mother to Tacoma. This was where his teenage life truly began. In high school, Ted tried very hard to appear successful and confident. He joined clubs, made friends, and tried to build the image of a smart young man with a bright future. But deep inside, Ted often felt rejected and lonely. One major turning point in his life came when he fell deeply in love with a woman named Diane Edwards. She was beautiful, wealthy, and came from a respected family. Ted admired her lifestyle and desperately wanted to be part of that world. However, their relationship did not last long. Diane eventually broke up with him, believing that Ted lacked ambition and maturity. This rejection devastated him. Friends later said that Ted became obsessed with proving himself after that breakup. He wanted power. He wanted control. And most importantly, he wanted revenge against the kind of women who reminded him of Diane. During the late 1960s, Ted attended the University of Washington. There, he studied psychology and became known as a polite and intelligent student. He also volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline in Seattle. Ironically, Ted spent nights helping people who were struggling with emotional pain. At the same time, investigators now believe that the darkness inside him was becoming stronger. Around this time, Ted began developing disturbing fantasies involving violence and control. These fantasies would soon turn into something far more dangerous. By the early 1970s, strange disappearances began to occur across the Pacific Northwest. Young women were vanishing. Many of them were college students. Many of them had long dark hair. And many of them were last seen near universities. Police had no clear suspect. No clear pattern. And no idea that the man responsible was someone who looked completely normal. Someone polite. Someone charming. Someone who could easily gain the trust of strangers. That man was Ted Bundy. His method was simple but terrifying. He often pretended to be injured. Sometimes he wore a fake arm cast, sometimes he used crutches. He would ask women for help carrying books or loading items into his car. Because he appeared harmless, many victims agreed to help. And that was the moment their lives would change forever. The first confirmed victims began disappearing in Seattle during 1974. Police quickly realized that something very unusual was happening. Within a few months, multiple young women had vanished without a trace. Witnesses began reporting a strange detail. Several people remembered seeing a man introduce himself with a simple name. Ted. At the time, no one knew that this ordinary name would soon become one of the most feared names in criminal history. As investigators searched for clues, the number of missing women continued to rise. Fear began spreading across college campuses. Students were warned not to walk alone at night. Parents were terrified. Communities were shocked. But the killer was still out there. Watching. Planning. And preparing for his next move. The real horror was only beginning. Because Ted Bundy was about to become more dangerous than anyone could imagine. And the police were still far from catching him. In the summer of 1974, something terrifying was happening in the quiet city of Seattle. Young women were disappearing. At first, the police thought these were separate missing person cases. But soon, a horrifying discovery changed everything. The first body. Weeks after one young woman disappeared, hikers in a remote forest area near Lake Sammamish State Park made a disturbing discovery. Hidden deep among the trees was a badly decomposed body. The police quickly arrived. The victim was a young college student who had vanished weeks earlier. But the most chilling part was this. There were signs that the killer had carefully hidden the body. This was not random violence. This was someone calculated, someone patient, someone dangerous. And this was only the beginning. A strange man named Ted. On a sunny day at Lake Sammamish State Park, dozens of people were enjoying the summer weather. Swimming. Relaxing. Laughing. But several witnesses later told police about a strange man they saw that day. He was tall. Handsome. Charming. And he had his arm in a sling. He approached multiple women asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. His name, he said, was Ted. 2 women helped him walk toward the parking lot. They were never seen alive again. Witnesses clearly remembered one shocking detail. The man drove a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. That small detail would become one of the most important clues in one of the most terrifying murder investigations in American history. 1975. Across the United States, young women were disappearing without a trace. Families were terrified, and police departments were under pressure to find the person responsible. Investigators began to suspect that these cases might not be random. The similarities between the disappearances were too strong to ignore. The victims were mostly young college women, last seen in public places, and then suddenly, gone. At the center of this growing mystery was a man who seemed completely ordinary. His name was Ted Bundy. To the outside world, Bundy looked like the last person anyone would suspect. He was intelligent, charming, and well-spoken. He studied law, volunteered in political campaigns, and had a steady relationship. Friends described him as polite and respectful. But behind that calm and friendly appearance, something dark was hiding. A strange encounter. One afternoon, a young woman reported something unusual to the police. She said a man approached her in a parking lot. His arm was in a sling, and he seemed to be struggling to load a boat onto his car. He politely asked her for help. Feeling sorry for him, she almost agreed. But at the last moment, something about the situation made her uncomfortable, and she walked away. Before leaving, she heard him introduce himself. His name was Ted. At first, the details seemed small. But when investigators looked deeper, they realized something disturbing. Several other witnesses had mentioned a man named Ted in similar situations. The pattern. More women began coming forward with similar stories. They described a friendly man who approached them in public places, college campuses, shopping centers, and parking lots. Often, he pretended to be injured. Sometimes he asked for help carrying books, loading a boat, or fixing something in his car. He was polite, calm, trustworthy. And because of that, people trusted him. But some women who helped him were never seen again. Police slowly began to realize they might be dealing with a serial killer, someone who carefully planned his crimes and chose his victims with disturbing precision. A critical clue. As investigators collected witness statements, one detail kept appearing again and again. The man named Ted was often seen driving a Volkswagen Beetle. It was a small car, but very common at the time. Still, the repeated mention of the same vehicle gave police something to work with. So detectives started compiling a list of men named Ted who owned a Volkswagen Beetle. One name on that list stood out. Ted Bundy. But there was a problem. Bundy had no serious criminal record. He was studying law and appeared to live a normal life. People who knew him described him as kind, intelligent, and responsible. There was simply not enough evidence to arrest him. The perfect mask. What made Ted Bundy so dangerous was his ability to appear completely normal. He understood how people thought. He knew how to gain their trust in seconds. While police were quietly investigating him, Bundy continued living his life as if nothing was wrong. He attended classes, spent time with friends, and maintained his relationship with his girlfriend. To everyone around him, he looked like a man with a bright future. No one could imagine that behind that confident smile was someone capable of unimaginable violence. A horrifying discovery. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In a remote wooded area, search teams found something disturbing: human bones scattered across the ground. Forensic investigators confirmed the worst fears. The remains belonged to several missing women. The evidence suggested they had been taken to the forest after disappearing. The case was no longer just about missing persons. It was now a confirmed serial murder investigation. And slowly, piece by piece, the evidence was beginning to point toward one man: Ted Bundy. But the most shocking part of the story was still ahead. Because the killer had not stopped yet, and soon, his crimes would become even more terrifying. By late 1975, the fear across several American states was growing stronger. Young women were still disappearing, and investigators were under enormous pressure to find the killer responsible. The name Ted Bundy had already appeared on police lists during the investigation. But there was still a major problem: there was no direct evidence that could connect him to the crimes. To most people, Bundy still looked like a normal young man with a promising future. But detectives had started watching him closely. The suspicious traffic stop. One night in Utah, a police officer noticed a car driving suspiciously through a quiet neighborhood. The vehicle was stopped. Behind the wheel was Ted Bundy. At first, the stop seemed routine. But when the officer searched the car, he found several strange items. Handcuffs. A crowbar. A ski mask. Rope. And an ice pick. These were not things someone usually carried during a late-night drive. Bundy tried to explain the items, but his answers were vague and unconvincing. Even though police were suspicious, they still didn't have enough proof that he had committed the earlier murders. However, this traffic stop would become a major turning point in the investigation. The survivor. Around the same time, a young woman named Carol Duranch came forward with a terrifying story. She told police that a man pretending to be a police officer had approached her at a shopping mall. He claimed someone had tried to break into her car and asked her to come with him to the police station. Trusting the man, she followed him to his car. But during the drive, something felt wrong. Suddenly, the man pulled out handcuffs and tried to restrain her. Carol realized she had been trapped. In a moment of pure panic and courage, she fought back with everything she had. She kicked, screamed, and struggled until she managed to escape from the moving car. She ran for her life. When police showed her photographs of possible suspects, Carol Duranch pointed directly to one man. Without hesitation, she identified Ted Bundy. This was the first strong witness who could connect Bundy directly to a violent crime. For investigators, this moment was critical. Finally, the mask of the perfect gentleman was starting to crack. The courtroom begins. Bundy was arrested and charged with kidnapping. Inside the courtroom, something strange happened. Instead of looking like a dangerous criminal, Ted Bundy appeared calm, confident, and even charming. Some people in the courtroom were shocked. How could someone who looked so normal be responsible for such horrific crimes? Bundy even decided to help with his own defense, using his legal knowledge to challenge the prosecution. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually convince the jury that he was innocent. The truth slowly emerges. But investigators were continuing their work behind the scenes. They were gathering more evidence, interviewing more witnesses, and connecting the disappearances across multiple states. Piece by piece, the terrifying truth was becoming clearer. The charming law student. The polite young man everyone trusted. The man who always seemed calm and intelligent. Might actually be one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. And the investigation into Ted Bundy was far from over. Because soon, the world would witness one of the most shocking criminal trials ever seen. And Bundy himself was about to do something no one expected, something that would make his story even darker. By 1977, the case against Ted Bundy was growing stronger. Investigators had gathered witnesses, evidence, and testimonies that connected him to several violent crimes. Bundy was taken to court in Colorado to face murder charges. But what happened next shocked the entire country. The first escape. During one court hearing, Ted Bundy asked permission to visit the courthouse library to prepare his defense. Since he had been studying law, the request seemed reasonable. At that time, the security around him was surprisingly relaxed. While alone in the library, Bundy quietly walked toward an open window. Then suddenly, he jumped. He fell nearly 2 stories to the ground and ran into the nearby mountains. Within seconds, he disappeared. Police launched a massive manhunt across the area. For several days, Bundy hid in the wilderness, surviving in the mountains and avoiding search teams. But after about a week on the run, he was finally captured and taken back to jail. Authorities believed this time he would never escape again. They were wrong. The second escape. Months later, after escaping, Ted Bundy traveled across several states until he reached Florida. For weeks, he stayed hidden under fake identities. But the violence had not ended. In January 1978, Bundy committed one of the most horrifying attacks of his life inside a college sorority house. Several young women were brutally attacked while they slept. The crime shocked the entire nation. Police were now desperately searching for the escaped killer. The final arrest. Just weeks later, a police officer in Florida noticed a suspicious car driving late at night. The driver was pulled over. The man gave a false name, but officers quickly realized who he really was. It was Ted Bundy. After months of fear and chaos, the most wanted fugitive in America had finally been captured. This time, there would be no escape. The end of the story. The trial of Ted Bundy became one of the most famous criminal trials in American history. Millions of people followed the case through television and newspapers. Eventually, Bundy was convicted of multiple murders. Years later, he was executed in prison, bringing an end to one of the darkest chapters in criminal history. But the story of Ted Bundy remains a chilling reminder of how dangerous appearances can be. Because sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't look like monsters at all. They look like ordinary people.